Time now to have a look at this morning's papers, and joining us this morning is Andrew Eborn, who is a barrister, very clever man, and a broadcaster. Good morning.
Sandwich between two doctors as well. And can I say...
You can never see a barrister or a doctor.
Yeah, but he earns more than me per hour.
But glorious. And can I say, when you jingle all the way. Both of you look sensational.
Thank you.
Which is fantastic. And talk about pink piggy eyes and jeans and jumpers. I love the alliteration, because the news today is all about an avalanche of alliterations. It's about strikes, it's about soccer, and it's about the Sussexes. Where would you like to start?
OK, so first of all, can I just get you to move this way? Or pull the microphone nearer to you. There we go.
How's that?
Because as a barrister, I know you can project your voice, but we actually do need to hear you. So what did you say, strikes?
Strikes, the Sussexes, or soccer?
Well, not the Sussexes. I can't bear any more of that. Should we start with... I mean, let's start with strikes. It is really very serious indeed, isn't it?
It's awful. And as they said in the Daily Mail, don't fall ill, don't rely on trains, and forget sending Christmas cards.
Absolutely.
We are in an appalling situation. And the trouble is this, is that all of them have a legitimate cause. You're entitled to go on strike. You're entitled to be paid a fair wage. The problem is, where's the money going to come from?
This is absolutely right, and I think also I totally understand why these unions are calling for more money. I think everyone is struggling with the cost of living and rampant inflation and all the rest of it. But as you rightly say, where does the money come from? But there are those people in the private sector, those people who run small businesses, thinking, I haven't had any pay because, of course, they had to actually keep their businesses afloat. And they're looking at those people who were furloughed, who were public sector employees, who actually got through COVID pretty nicely. And a lot of people in the private sector have really struggled.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, you're both from the medical profession. I would value your views on nurses going on strike, for example, and some of the essential services. I know your views on the border force, for example.
Yeah.
Just at the critical time when people need to get away, we're being punished on that sort of side. What are your views about nurses?
Well, I think it's the same, isn't it? It's the critical time. So we're in midwinter, which is always a very difficult time. We clearly have a crisis in the NHS because we haven't got enough space for anybody because we can't discharge people. I think nurses are not reading the room correctly. I think that giving them a pay rise now, whilst they deserve a pay rise, of course they do, is not going to change the recruitment problem overnight. That's a much bigger problem. So I just think it's wrong. If they want to strike, let's do it in summer when it won't bring the system to its knees, but it will still have an effect. Of course it will. So I think it's completely wrong.
I mean, also, I would add to that, the 19.2% I just think is fanciful. I don't think there is any way they're going to get that, and I think they know that.
And will drive inflation.
And ironically will drive inflation.
You go on that spiral of descent, don't you? Which is a nightmare on that sort of thing. So it really is, when people strike, they should turn around and say, look, OK, this is what we want, and here's the economics of it, and this is where you can find it from, because there's a knock-on effect for everything.
Of course.
And the knock-on effect with inflation and the cost of living and so on and so forth is
So let me ask you a question. You know, the government is now talking tough and saying, actually, those people who are giving those life-saving functions, like nurses, should be stopped from going on strike. There should be minimum service levels that are introduced. Do you think that's the right thing to do?
I think the danger, I can see both sides on that, that whenever there are critical services, and it's the same with border force and so on and so forth, and various others, and policing and so on and so forth, the difficulty is if you take them away or give people the right to strike, then they're going to have a massive knock-on effect on everybody else's life.
Yeah.
And I think unless we can find a sensible solution, and there is no magic money tree, as good old Theresa May would say, and so you need to turn around and say, look, we've got these problems. People are trying to address it. We had Jeremy Hunt, and it's in the papers as well, trying to take on New York City.
Yeah, so this is interesting. This is the Telegraph, page 39. I mean, so obviously this was in the wake of the financial crash, wasn't it? The fact is that they wanted to impose more regulations to ensure that we never went through that again. So just talk us through this. So Jeremy Hunt essentially saying, it's a benefit of Brexit. We need to deregulate. We need to allow the financial heart of the country to actually prosper. Is that roughly the take?
That's it. It's trying to loosen the regulations so that we can get trade moving again. You can attract the top city traders and so on and so forth without caps on pensions and so on and so forth, without caps on how much you pay them. And the reality is that and it's a balance, isn't it? It's a balance between protection for the consumer and protection for the industry, so we don't have the terrible crashes that we've had, but also making sure that it's not over-regulated. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to make sure that the balance is right. We need to get the details. The devil is always going to be in the details. His 30-point plan.
I disagree. I don't think he is trying to do that. I think they're just trying to, you know, appease their mates in the city, I'm afraid, because we actually were doing very, very well in the financial markets in this country after 2008 when these regulations were introduced. We had the biggest financial centre in the world, so I don't think it needed any overhaul, but I'm sure that the people who work in banking would like these restrictions lifted.
And people who work in banking are the ones who drive it.
Yes,
so from that
course.
point of view, I get your point totally. But if you don't attract the top talent, if you have those,
but were we? But you see, the point they would say is that post-Brexit, that many people actually left for lots of reasons, and they went back to other countries. And if you tax them too highly, for example, they will leave. Yeah. And remember, it is they
you
can
know
work
I'm on side.
I know you are. I'm just
not sure this is the right time to do this.
Well, what is extraordinary is that the timing with this and faced with a barrage of strikes, including, by the way, barristers.
Of course.
Yeah.
Crime
Which is why you're
pay.
here, probably.
No, crime doesn't pay, absolutely.
But you see, so you've got the government who basically, in my humble opinion, is increasingly rudderless, that doesn't know what it's doing. How much of this is actually tokenistic? How much of this is politics?
Oh, I think at the moment, until we've got the details, it's a wonderful headline. We have this glorious thing in Edinburgh. We're going to make a 30-point plan to how we're going to make this the new New York. And until you go into the details, the devil is in the details, that makes sense. But just to pick you up on the barrister's point, and it's not all...
It was a cheap shot.
Don't say I'm cheap. Cheap is the price.
Do you know
Crime
some barristers
doesn't
were earning
pay.
£8 an hour.
And that's the point.
Junior barrister.
I don't understand why is that?
I'll tell you what happens. It's this: is that about 2% of the people own over $1 million and things like that, and barristers quaffing Cristal champagne and dining on Larkstand and Aspic. Certain of us do that. We do that.
Do you?
Permanently. I'm swimming.
Must be trained.
Swimming this morning.
I know. We're going out for dinner with you.
You're welcome anytime. But what happens when you start at the criminal bar? The first 3 years you're on legal aid, and the majority of them, they're self-employed. The majority of them are getting less than £12,000 a year. And the problem is, it's also when
so how
you
do
get
you
paid.
support yourself?
Well, they don't. They have to come from rich families, and
Yeah.
this is the problem. And so that's why they need to do this. So when people, and the headlines, the problem with the headlines, they say barristers are striking. Well, again, barristers are rich people, but why on earth are they doing it? That's not the reality.
Surely, so if I didn't know that, and I'm not aware of that, then clearly they need to up their PR.
Absolutely. And I think this is my point on all of these strikes, is we need to turn around and say, up the PR. We get it, that everybody should be paid a fair wage.
Yeah.
Yes.
You need to do that. You have a right to tell people we're not being paid.
Yes.
What you have to do is to separate the propaganda from the facts.
Yes.
So you need to work out more light, less heat is what we need.
And when your job is saving people's lives, you have to then think very, very carefully about downing tools.
Well, I would agree with that as well. So do you think this is going to be welcomed, Jeremy Hunt's proposal?
I think the devil's in the details. I think absolutely the city chums, they're welcoming it already. I think it is. I think if you get the balance right between regulation and protection, it's absolutely going to make sure that we can stimulate the economy.
You see, so the reason I am slightly in favour is that obviously post-Brexit, and obviously I was part of that and fought for it, we haven't left. I mean, we still are. We have swathes of European law. We do need to start forging a new course, but I agree with you. In terms of timing, it doesn't look great.
But I also come at it that in Liz's budget, she relaxed this relentless IR35 crackdown on the small self-employed man, and
they put it back in
and lifted the cap on bankers' bonuses, which I also thought was okay. I thought that was fine. But when Hunt came back, he put back in the IR35 for the little man, but didn't put back the cap on bankers' bonuses.
So that's a really good point, which is... So let me just ask you, in terms of that, do you feel the government is in touch with the electorate? Because I'm not sure it is.
Well, I think it's a wonderful general question. So the short answer is yes and no. There are parts of it where they
Very
have
good
to
barrister
listen.
answer.
I thank you. which I have other answers available as well. It's all good.
But for a fee.
The clock's already ticking, I can tell you. No, it has to work on that basis. We've got another 2 years before the election. Lots of people are defecting to your party, and I know you're permanently talking about that. And
other parties are available.
Other parties are available. When you're nicely balanced, they
just
are available.
Just have to say.
But it's all about the message. And just as we were talking about strikes, just as we were talking about the other aspects as well, getting the PR right. You need to make sure that you're listening to people and say, look, we recognise the problem, but you need to present both sides. And when I say both sides, look, when you're looking for increased money, this is what you need to do. Where are we going to find it? These are the consequences.
Yeah, how do you think these strikes will end?
Painfully is the short answer, because if everybody goes on strike, you've got to turn around and say, well, where's the money going to come from?
So it was interesting. I was at a function the other night, and in fact, we were saying this is almost as bad as the 70s. And in fact, there was an older chap there who said that actually this is worse than the 70s.
And I think that's right. And I think nostalgia ain't what it used to be. I think you sort of turn round and people will remember the winter of discontent, those sort of headlines, and the misery that you've got. And the trouble is you're combining that with all of the other stuff. We're drowning in a sea of misinformation, most of which is bad news, and nothing draws a crowd like a fight. And I think people fighting on issues, and the press is sort of focusing on that, we're going to drown in misery.
Well, talking about drowning in misery and spoiling for a fight, shall we talk about Meghan and Harry?
The press love that sort of stuff.
So I have to confess, I have seen the first one.
Yes.
I've seen 1.5 and then I got too bored.
I've seen all 3. Come on,
Meghan and Harry Trump.
Thank you.
It's top Trumps.
I've won.
You have won, yeah.
But I'll tell you why it's important.
Wind speed.
Because most people, as they do with anything in the media, they go in with their own prejudices, so they're looking for the negative side on that sort of basis.
Everything we do in life is through our own lens.
Oh, absolutely.
Always remember
But that being said, the first one, and I have only seen one, I actually watched it and I understood. I totally understood what Harry meant, and he is clearly a very traumatised man who has had a very difficult background, and obviously the loss of his mother. And actually, I left that first episode thinking, OK, he's now he's sort of captivated by Meghan, but I didn't think it was that bad. Now, what I have read is obviously numbers 2 and 3 up the ante.
Well, I think they certainly address the race issue, which is a clear sort of thing. One of the most shocking things, and I'd never heard this before, is firstly Meghan is called Meg.
I know.
I didn't know that. What's that? That's like the recession has hit in. You sort of trunk off part of the name now.
Her mum says I said Meg.
Meg? Nobody calls her Meghan. And that's why she even revealed that a text from her father wasn't from her father, because he called her Meghan. And nobody calls her Meghan. Interesting. What I also didn't know is that Prince Harry, is H. Or has. And the only H I knew was from Steps.
I'm very impressed you know who H from Steps is.
And talk about tragedy. I mean, that just sort of segue into that. No, it was an interesting revelation. I thought it was quite touching about how they dated. He found her on Instagram with her little dog ears and a dog tongue hanging out, and she searched him and saw all the animals and things like that. And I think they went to Botswana or something on the first.
Harry for the first time.
She'd never heard of him. Or thereabouts. And you sound so sceptical.
So you're saying you don't believe it?
Of course I don't believe that she'd never heard of Prince Harry. Come on.
Well, she probably heard of him, but in terms of dating scene, she was young, free and single and ready to mingle, and that's what she
there was a prince.
And there was a prince, and they were put together by a couple. It was a wonderfully sarcastic. I actually thought, and it was the first time I went in with an open mind, and I would recommend that everybody watch it with an open mind, because everybody's looking for their prejudices. And if you look at the press afterwards, they're just pandering to those prejudices. And I think if you look at it, there were some touching moments in there. And I got it. What I'd like to do with everything is provide balance, because the royal family...
So here's my balance to it. The bit that I felt very sorry for him for was when they were on the ski slopes, when he was at Eton, when there was 20 deep press calling out to him just after his mother had died. I did then actually think that is obscene.
And you could see the pictures of those children's faces was they didn't know what to do.
That was obscene.
And it was all... And one of the most tragic... And I spoke to Charles Spencer. I've interviewed him a few times. And the tragedy about the BBC and how that interview came about. But he said one of the most harrowing moments for him with Harry is when Harry was forced to walk behind
the coffin.
And you see, he's a kid. And Charles told me, I don't know if it's public, it is now, it's on your show reveal. Charles told me, thank you, exclusive. We'd like to mingle and jingle, it's got to be good. The exclusive thing, Charles told me that he tried to persuade them not to have Harry do that, because it is so traumatising. Because it is. You imagine, it's bad enough anyway. Grief
is trying to persuade them.
Charles Spencer.
Charles Spencer.
Diane's brother. Yes. So he basically tried to say, look, don't let Harry do this, because it's going to be so traumatising anyway. When you live live your life in public and the whole scrutiny is on you, the pressure is just horrendous. So I actually, in the interest of balance, I felt sorry, and I still feel sorry for Harry. I also think that Meghan is not as bad as...
Well, hang on a minute. What about this idea that they're attacking the Queen's entire life with the Commonwealth, saying it's Empire 2.0?
Well, I don't think they are. I think that's the headline without seeing the whole shows.
Well, I haven't seen them. But then I heard various Commonwealth countries saying this morning that actually we're not naive. We've joined it because it's really good for our country.
And that's the headline in the Express. They were sort of saying it was patronising fury over an attack on the Queen's life's work.
I mean, I said, and I tweeted, that I think the Queen would be turning in her grave to watch this being aired in public.
Yeah, oh, she would. And it was always Disraeli, and then it was taken on by the royalties, that you never complain, never explain.
Exactly.
And that's what the royal family are maintaining, that sort of air of dignity.
And the only other point I'm going to make about this, lots of children have terrible lives.
Yes.
I mean, terrible lives. You know, children go through abuse, terrible conditions, and they grow up and they get on with their lives and they put it behind them. Now, not all of them do.
Yeah.
And often, as a GP, the trauma that I see in adulthood comes from childhood. But, you know, Harry's life, yes, he did have lots of things, but he also lives a very, very, very privileged life.
Oh, absolutely.
Indeed. And The Independent, I believe, this morning is talking about how to manage a big family football.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Which is actually... and it's something that I mooted yesterday, saying actually what they need as a family is counselling.
Well, and there's great advice in there. Page 32 for those who get a copy of the No Oui Cant. Great advice, like make sure both parties are heard. Well, you've got to do that sort of stuff. Be assertive, not aggressive. Always important. Remove yourself from any difficulties. So it's wise.
But they did that.
I think they did. They sort of went over to...
They went to a different country.
Well, that's good. But they sold to make sure they got privacy. They did a Netflix series.
Both sides being heard, that can't happen, you see.
No, because the royal family don't have a right of reply.
Well, they could have.
Well, no, they have a right, but it's never either confirmed nor denied. And that normally... But they have. When people say that, and it's a misunderstanding about what they do. They have wonderful PR machines.
Yes,
and I think the press will make sure, and there's a game they talked about in the series which you're going to watch.
I will, unfortunately.
I'll give you the summary every week. What's going to happen is they have press doing the positive press to make sure the spin is there. And sometimes, one of the revelations is you get conflicting stories from different parts of the press to make somebody look good and somebody else not look good, and so on and so forth. So it's understanding how that PR machine works, which is key.
So we're running out of time. There are many stories here, and I don't know where to go next. I mean, the Times says that girls lead the way in private and state education. I want to move on, if I can, to the Telegraph front page in a cartoon. What's the cartoon?
Matt's cartoon. Matt is always a joy. You probably put it up on the screen. But he's combining about that sort of side. He says, if football
you
is
can't see anything.
You can't see anything. You with your pig eyes, you stay over there.
My piggy eyes.
Well, what I love is I've got a tie to match your eyes as well. So
thank you. That's very so kind.
If football is thinking of coming home, someone should tell it about the planned border force strikes. So that's what Matt says in the Telegraph. It's always
extremely
good. I love it.
And then some good news, shall we do? There's been a new birth at London Zoo.
Oh, isn't that glorious?
What is it? I don't know about this.
Oh no! Well, I'll tell you what. It wasn't even London Zoo. Fake news. It was Bristol Zoo.
Well, it says London Zoo on my screen.
I can't help what your screen says.
Right, producer sacked again.
No, that's probably my fault for feeding it. It's got to be. They wanted to be born, but they couldn't hold on, so they were stayed in Bristol. Is what happened. It is a pitter-patter of rare tapir feet.
They're pretty little babies, and then they grow up so boring.
No, when you say boring...
Well, they're beautiful little babies with stripes and spots and things, and then they grow up to be
What do you mean they're boring? Just not very engaging conversation.
The talkative tapir, coming to Talk TV soon.
I don't know what you've been doing.
I lead a very lonely life.
You do.
But you're right, they look glorious.
They
and if
do.
you haven't, I don't know if you can pull up a picture of this, but you've got a baby tapir, and they're spotty and stripy. And that's the idea about camouflage and things like that. But what I love about it, it's an endangered species. So it's good to have some positive
I have to go to a break, but I want to know about a psychic alpaca.
I'll tell you about... it's like, this is all about football's coming home. Well, it might do. We keep Tiger... 1996. There is a psychic alpaca. It has spoken. We had Paul the octopus.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember the octopus? Yes, the octopus and went to mollusks and things like that. The psychic alpaca has spoken, and it's not good news, I'm afraid.
Oh.
No. Well, we can hope that the psychic alpaca... I won't even tell you. I don't want to bring us down. Yes, we can, but no, we can't, according to the psychic alpaca.
Oh, well, I'm very sad about that. But, I mean, everyone needs a psychic alpaca, I think. Andrew, thank you so much.
It's a joy.
It's been a great pleasure to see you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.
For coming in.